Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what I like to call the ultimate cold case of our own minds, figuring out exactly where our earliest memories actually went. I mean, the first few years of your life are arguably the most eventful, right? Yet the historical record of that time is completely wiped clean. So let's explore the absolutely fascinating biology behind why that happens. Seriously, I want you to think back for just a second. Do you remember being born? What about your first birthday party, or maybe taking your first steps? If you're like the rest of humanity, you probably draw a complete blank. It's this universal period of missing time that we all just kind of share. And, it's something we usually just accept, but it's honestly super bizarre when you stop and really think about it. Well, this phenomenon is so universal, it actually has a documented scientific name. It's called infantile amnesia. Basically, that defines the universal inability of adults to recall episodic or autobiographical memories from the first few years of life. We are essentially blocked from accessing the very origins of our own life story. And scientists, they've spent literally over a century trying to figure out why.
Section 1. The Old Suspects. Early Guesses for Our Forgotten Years. For decades, researchers grappled with this core paradox. If early childhood is a time of massive, rapid learning, why are the records of that time wiped completely clean? Let's quickly look at some of those early guesses.
Naturally, we gotta start with Sigmund Freud, the guy who actually coined the term infantile amnesia. He asked his patients to describe their earliest memories, and when they couldn't, he came up with a theory. He figured these memories were stored perfectly intact in the brain, but were actively repressed because of their highly emotional and, well, sexually charged content. It's a classic, slightly obsessive Freudian take, right? But, shocker, later scientific studies failed to find any real empirical evidence for this whole repression model. So, psychologists started firing off a list of other cognitive and linguistic suspects. Some argued the infant's central nervous system was just way too immature to hold on to long-term data. Others suggested that, hey, because babies can't hold a conversation, they literally lack the language skills to mentally encode those experiences. And some even argued infants don't have an understanding of an autobiographical self yet, so they have no framework to organize personal memories. Now, while these factors definitely play a part, they just don't give us the whole picture. Moving to Section 2, the plot twist, proof that babies do remember. Because what if I told you that babies actually do form memories? It turns out their brains aren't just failing to record the information. The data is being recorded. It's just disappearing later. Okay, let's dive into this. Researcher Carolyn Rovi-Collier designed this brilliantly simple experiment to prove it. She took 3-month-old infants and tied a ribbon from their little foot to a cribmobile. At first, the baby just makes random movements, right? But pretty quickly, they realize that kicking their leg makes the mobile shake, and they absolutely love this. After a couple of sessions, researchers take the mobile away. Then, exactly 1 week later, they bring the exact same mobile back. And what happens? The infant immediately starts kicking. They clearly demonstrated short-term memory of the whole task. But there is a huge catch here. She found that this infant memory is incredibly fragile, and it's highly context-dependent. Meaning, if the original mobile had, say, yellow blocks with blue letters, but the researchers swapped it for one with blue blocks and yellow letters, the baby wouldn't kick. The memory faded rapidly unless the context was an exact match. So we know for a fact babies can remember, but those memories are fundamentally unstable, which meant we needed a real biological explanation for where they go. Which brings us to Section 3, the neurogenesis breakthrough, uncovering the biological culprit. This is where we find the real answer, championed by researchers like Paul Franklin and Sheena Jocelyn. We're going to focus on exactly how the physical growth of the brain affects our early memory. To understand their breakthrough, we've got to define a term first: neurogenesis. Basically, it's the continuous production and development of brand new neurons, or nerve cells, within the brain. Now, for the longest time, scientists assumed this just stopped after early development. But nope, it continues right into adulthood. And crucially, it happens heavily in the hippocampus, which is the brain's primary memory center. During those early years of life, this new neuron growth is happening at an absolute maximum rate. It's an overdrive. And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference between our memory now, as adults, and our memory back then. See, the adult hippocampus experiences slow neurogenesis. That means its neural circuits are relatively stable, which allows for persistent long-term memories. But the infant hippocampus, it is a wild, active construction zone. It's experiencing rapid neurogenesis, creating highly unstable circuits. And that instability is exactly what results in those fragile, short-lived memories. Section 4. Remodeling the brain, how new cells physically erase old memories. Because we now know that these new cells are quite literally overriding the old ones. So, the crucial point here is this. As these brand new neurons rapidly integrate into the hippocampus, they actually have to compete with the existing cells for inputs and outputs. And by doing that, they establish new synaptic connections that effectively replace the pre-existing ones. Think of it kind of like trying to clean a highly cluttered house by constantly bringing in massive piles of new furniture. Eventually, the old furniture gets pushed completely out, the connections are overwritten, and the entire room is just completely remodeled.
To prove this, researchers looked at animal models, and the data is honestly astounding. It turns out neurogenesis acts like a literal volume dial on memory retention. Let's look at adult mice first. If you take adult mice and artificially turn up their neurogenesis, it actively induces the forgetting of established memories. It literally pushes the old data right out. Now flip it. Take infant mice and artificially decrease their neurogenesis, slowing down that rapid brain growth. And suddenly, their memories are preserved. They even looked at precocial species, like infant guinea pigs. These guys are born with pretty mature brains and naturally low postnatal neurogenesis. And guess what? They don't normally experience infantile amnesia at all. But when researchers cranked up their neurogenesis, boom, they induced infantile amnesia right on cue. It is a direct, biological cause and effect. Section 5. The price of new learning, the necessary trade-off between stability and plasticity. Because at this point, you're probably wondering, why on earth would the brain purposefully sacrifice its own historical records? Well, Dr. Paul Franklin sums it up perfectly. He says, the formation of new memories is facilitated by clearing away the clutter, if you like. If the infant hippocampus just kept every single fragile, tiny memory, it would hit a saturation point. Clearing out those old memories actually reduces interference. It makes room for the brain to absorb the massive amounts of new information it absolutely needs to survive in a brand new world. So what you should really take away from this explainer is that forgetting your early years is not a failure of your brain. Not at all. It is an incredibly necessary biological trade-off. Your infant brain intentionally sacrifices specific early episodic memories just so it can build a robust framework to interpret the whole world. You might lose the specific memory of your first steps, sure, but you gain the permanent motor framework of how to walk. But man, this leaves us with one final, incredible mystery. If our earliest memories are physically overwritten by new neurons, were they truly permanently erased? Or are they just locked away, progressively inaccessible, but hiding deep within the remodeled architecture of our minds? In fact, recent optogenetic studies in mice have actually managed to recover some of these lost infant memories, which hints that the data might still be in there somewhere. It's a deeply provocative thought, and one that completely redefines how we think about the lost years of our own past.